Hello stranger! The following might seem a little familiar to you, and that's because I've decided to remake an early video of mine named Introduction to Problematization in Storytelling. Why? Well, that was one of the earliest videos that I ever wrote and made, and while I was pleased with the result at the time, I now feel that my content creation powers have doubled and I have even more to say on the topic. But for those new to my channel, then you can expect the following to be explored in this video. The problem with a purely subjective mindset in media criticism, why objective criticism in art is as valuable as subjective criticism, how we can use both objective and subjective thinking to improve storytelling, and finally, why we should care about any of the above. This is going to be quite a dense video, and for some quite controversial, but I hope you can give it a chance and go in with an open mind. Who knows, you may learn something. I'm John from the Author's Anvil, let's get neck deep in armchair writing philosophy, shall we? Okay, so this first section of the video isn't amazingly sexy, but hey, we gotta do it. I want to first make sure that we're all on the same page about the topics being covered in this video. Even if you don't completely agree with the following definitions, I hope you can at least understand them so that when I talk about them later on in the video, you know what I'm referring to. Just a quick note, but I want to make it clear that this video has nothing to do with philosophical conceptual schemes, or the reality of existence, or anything like that. This video is operating under the accepted truths that we all live by. Not that I'm against an abstract philosophical debate every once in a while, but that is just a whole other topic. Accepted truths are just the basic things that we don't even think about in order to live our lives, such as gravity existing, or the sky being blue, or that Han definitely shot first. If you want to debate against what is real and what isn't, then I'm afraid this video isn't for you. Still here? Good, let's continue. Objectivity and subjectivity in criticism. What are they, and why have they become such controversial terms in online film and TV discourse? When someone is being subjective, they are making statements or opinions that are based on personal feelings and/or beliefs, rather than on facts. In regards to storytelling criticism, a subjective take would be something like, I like The Dark Knight, it's my favourite film that I've watched this year. There's nothing much more to say here. You can't criticise or analyse how someone else feels about the film because everyone has different feelings or beliefs attached to the media they consume. Meanwhile, when someone is being objective, they are making statements and observations that are removed as much as possible from feelings and beliefs. They are instead based on facts and logic. An example would be, in The Dark Knight, there is a character called Bruce Wayne and he is secretly Batman. There is no opinion or room for interpretation in this statement. No matter who you are or what personal opinions you have on anything, you can't deny a fact such as that. Although no one can deny the objective facts about what happens in a film or TV show, the current prevailing sentiment when it comes to media criticism is that it is all subjective. I know when I was growing up, I was always told in English class that everything is just opinion, everything is just up to interpretation. Art isn't science, so when we look at a story, it's all just opinion, right? You can't actually think that you can say objectively that a film is good or bad, right? Our subjective experience of a film or TV are so wildly different from one another that it would be impossible to measure anything objectively, right? What's the problem anyway? As everything's subjective, doesn't that mean we can have endless interpretations of a piece of media? Surely if we were to start looking at things from an objective lens, we would just start perpetuating negativity and being overly critical of other people's work, right? Well, dear viewer, I think it's time we interrogated the purely subjective lens and look at why sentiments such as, it's just all my opinion, and there's no such thing as good and bad art, can lead to some pretty bad places. So I'm going to try my best to be charitable in this section. I genuinely believe that when most people say that media criticism is purely subjective, they either haven't thought that much about what that actually means, or they're just avoiding conflict with obnoxious writing nerds such as myself. I think very few people deep down actually believe that stories are all purely subjective. More often than not, when people say a film is good or bad, what they actually mean is that they liked the film or disliked it. Now, we'll get into the difference between those statements later on in the video, but right now I want to attack the fundamental problems with people who claim that everything is purely subjective. And yes, they do exist. So firstly, if everything is purely subjective, then how could we possibly talk about films or TV shows at all? As I said earlier, nobody can deny that things happen and characters are present in stories. If I came out of the cinema after watching The Dark Knight and said that it was a bad film because Shrek was a terrible villain in it, then I don't think anyone would say, oh, what a valid subjective opinion, John. More likely, they would be very confused. This is because to some degree, we do all share an objective experience of a story. The writer has put certain characters and events in place that we as the audience cannot change or interpret, as much as we'd like to sometimes.
A finger in the bum.
Unless you want to go into deep philosophy about the nature of reality and conceptual schemes, which we agreed we wouldn't do at the start of this video, then you have to accept that there are objective elements to a story. And if there are objective elements to a story, then there are standards we can apply to those elements. But more of that later, I haven't stopped beating up subjectivity. The other large problem with the purely subjectivist standpoint is that yes, it stops any form of negative and toxic discussion around media, but it also equally stops any positive discussion too. Think about it. If everything we experience in a story is purely subjective and just up to everyone's opinion, then there is no such thing as quality. And if there is no such thing as quality, then I'm afraid you can't be positive about anything. As much as you might want to gush about the character work behind Marriage Story, or the themes behind 12 Angry Men, or the cinematography of Dune. No, not that one. Well, you can't because that's just your opinion. Sorry everyone, but if you're going to get mad at critics for nitpicking and being overly critical, then you have to get equally mad when they're being overly positive too. Because how dare someone be so arrogant as to express their opinion in any way when everything is just up to interpretation? This brings me on to a smaller point that draws my annoyance. These same people who claim everything is subjective are inadvertently spitting on the writers and teachers who spend a great deal of time crafting genuinely great stories. Again, if you truly believe that there is no such thing as good and bad writing, then you have to concede that my 8th grade story about Piney the Pine Marten, yes that is true, is of equal value to a Shakespearean play or a work by Stephen King. Yes, my shitty story that I wrote in an hour for a homework project when I knew nothing about writing is as valuable as Misery, or It. That is a very hard and uncomfortable pill to even look at, and if you believe that everything is just opinion, then I'm afraid you're going to have to go all the way and swallow it too. And just a small note, but you're also going to have to concede that all language and literature teachers around the world are just all talentless hacks. Because, as everything is all subjective, then why are these people trying to tell me what to do? Good sentence structure? Proper grammar? It's all just opinion. For any language or literature teachers out there, let me make it very clear that your job has worth, you are important. Don't let any postmodern pure subjectivist asshole tell you any different. Okay, rant over. To conclude this section, however, I want to make it very clear that despite the criticisms I've just levied against the purely subjective mindset, I do absolutely believe that a healthy dose of subjectivity is important and unavoidable when talking about media. The rest of this video then is going to be about how we can use objective critique in tandem with subjectivity in order to have insightful and interesting discussions on stories. Both are equally important and inform the other. So I hope I've made it clear why having a purely subjective viewpoint is a pretty poor path to tread if you're wanting to review media. Let's explore the other side of the coin then. Objectivity. We've established that events happen in a story, and that very often you have characters within that story performing actions that cause more events. We can extend this thinking to other aspects of the film or TV show. Do the characters perform actions that make sense for their character? For example, given the events of the original Star Wars trilogy and Luke Skywalker's established character of always seeing the good in people and always standing fast with his friends, does it make sense that he would almost murder his nephew in his sleep because of a bad dream he had? No, not really. This is not a, oh it's just your opinion moment. Something like this is a complete contradiction of who Luke Skywalker was and is, and nobody's feelings on the matter change that objective fact. Now, how much this contradiction bothers you is completely up to you. Nobody is telling you how to feel about this objectively bad writing. You set your own standards, you are the one who decides whether this mistake ruins your experience of the story, but at the root of it, it is still a mistake. Here's another example. In the Lord of the Rings trilogy, at the start of Fellowship of the Ring, if you look carefully enough in one of the shots in the Shire, you can see a production car moving around. This is a mistake because objectively the film has established that this is supposed to be a medieval fantasy world that does not have the technology to make cars. So having a car in the shot raises a lot of questions about why the characters simply don't just hop into one instead of walking the whole way to Mordor. This is an objective mistake. You cannot sit there and tell me that subjectively the car isn't there, because I'm sorry, it is. However, although we can see this objective mistake, in my opinion, it's not a big enough mistake to break my immersion because it is literally just a flash of light at the corner of the screen. Our focus is on Frodo and Sam, so you can happily watch this film without noticing the mistake even when you know about it. I am much more invested, however, in bad character writing. I absolutely adore following interesting characters who explore a certain theme or who I can relate to, or who are just simply entertaining to watch. For me personally, mistakes in character consistency, like the example of Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, are very damning to a film or TV's enjoyment. They might not be to you or your friend or your family member's taste, but for me personally, having consistent character writing is essential for my enjoyment of a story. But enough digression, we'll get onto the marriage of subjectivity and objectivity shortly. I just want to hammer home what can be achieved when we look at media through an objective lens, although I hope that you have already come to this realization. By looking at stories through an objectively critical lens, writers can do something called redrafting and editing to improve their writing. It is essential in any kind of writing to look at your work and make sure that there aren't horrible plot holes that take the viewer out of the film, or that characters are properly fleshed out so that when you kill them, it stimulates an emotional reaction from the audience. This might come as a shock, but the objective events of a story and how well they fit together is what causes people to feel emotions when watching a film or TV show. Crazy, right? Yes, it can be damning to look at your favourite film or TV show and realise that it's actually not as well written or well produced as you initially thought, but hey, the inverse can happen too. You might watch something with a critical lens that you didn't fully appreciate before and now realise that it is actually really well written. Objectivity and criticism has this bad rep of just being toxic and nitpicky, and while yes, some people can absolutely take it too far and be overly obsessive, I would again remind you of the pitfalls of being purely subjective. As we've determined, being purely subjective means that there's no such thing as good or bad, so it's impossible to compliment someone on a piece of work, and it's impossible to provide feedback for them to improve, which in my humble opinion is just as toxic as being purely objective. Being objective is of course very difficult as we are creatures of emotion, but that does not mean that it's something we shouldn't try to strive for. By looking at media through a more critical lens, we can help each other to understand and craft stories so that we have more exciting, more insightful, and more emotionally impactful films and TV shows to watch in the future. So it's time for us to look at how objective and subjective critiques and views of media can exist in happy harmony together. They may be complete opposites, but I do believe that like yin and yang, they can peacefully coexist, and are necessary. Simply, we just need to separate our subjective view from our objective analysis. Our experience of a story is, yes, very different to someone else's, but not in the way that you might think. There are many factors outside of the film or TV show that can affect our opinion of it. You might have watched it when you were having a bad day, or you might have watched it with an ex-girlfriend, or you might have watched it when you were tired and couldn't concentrate on it properly. All of these environmental factors really can affect your perception of a film, and it doesn't stop there. Perhaps there's an actor in a TV show who you don't like, and even if the character is written well, your distaste for the actor will probably make it harder for you to avoid negative bias. Or a film's subject matter might be upsetting or distressing to you if it deals with something that you yourself have experienced. For example, Mufasa's death in The Lion King, spoilers by the way, might hit somebody who's lost a parental figure much harder compared to someone who still has both of their parents alive. Or even more simply, the story just might not be a genre that you particularly enjoy. Personal note, but I really struggle with war films because I find the subject matter and the historical events surrounding them very upsetting. I have a friend of mine who can't stand fantasy as a genre and just thinks it's cringe edgelords swinging swords at each other. We all have our likes and dislikes, and that is absolutely valid and fine. But it is crucial that we recognise these factors and the emotions that are attached to them so that we can be more objective in our actual analysis. There is a huge difference then between saying I don't like a film and this film was bad. They are two completely different conversations that I think more often than not get confused as being the same. What we can do to have more productive conversations around media consumption is to put stories into the following matrix. Here we have one axis that is subjective enjoyment, and then the other axis is about objective writing and production competence. We can roughly put stories then into one of these four quadrants. Subjectively enjoyed the story even if the writing was bad, subjectively disliked the story even if the writing was good, objectively assessed that the writing was bad and also disliked the story, and finally the golden cow of experiencing a well-written story that you also enjoyed. I'm going to run through a personal example for each one, using a single film as I go. So firstly, a film that I subjectively enjoyed even though I recognised that it was badly written. For many people, this would include cult classics such as The Room or Sharknado, which are so bad that they are amusing to watch. For me though, I want to give the example of Star Trek First Contact. It is a really badly written Star Trek film that makes little to no sense in plot and also badly misrepresents several of the characters from the Next Generation TV show. Go watch Mr. Plinkett's review for more details. But then, how can I subjectively like it? Well, you see, I have a very fond memory of watching this film for the first time when I was 8 years old with my dad, and I loved the cool action scenes, and the Borg, and the gritty subject matter. It was the film that got me into the Star Trek universe, and thus shaped me into the person and writer I am today. And for that reason, I could never dislike this film. Would I recommend it to a random person though? Hell no. On to the next quadrant. A film I subjectively disliked even though it is well written. Again, a confusing one at first. Surely if you assess that it's well written, that should automatically mean that you like it, right? Well, no, let's harken back to something such as genre bias. Saving Private Ryan is a brilliantly directed and written war film with many iconic scenes and depictions of World War II. So for me personally, I don't like it because as I said earlier, I really don't get on with war films. This does not mean that I should go around telling people that it is a bad film. I would instead absolutely recommend Saving Private Ryan to anyone who's looking for a war film or for just an intense cinematic experience. Can you see what I've done in those first two quadrants then? I've separated my subjective experience that is based on outside factors from the actual objective assessment of the writing and production. This is what everyone should do, and the more you do it, the easier it gets, trust me. But anyway, now onto the more obvious quadrants. An objectively badly written story that you also disliked? These will be the bottom of the barrel for you. A personal example for me would be Avengers Endgame, which I know is a spicy take for a lot of people, but one day that video will be released and all shall be revealed. And finally, we have what should be the experience we all strive for. Watching an objectively well-written film or TV show and also enjoying it. I'll throw out what is a pretty safe pick and say that 12 Angry Men absolutely fills this quadrant for me. If you have not seen that film, then go watch it after this video, it's really great. Of course, this matrix will be different for everyone depending on the subjectivity axis, but what there should be is quite a spread between the four quadrants. Have fun drawing your own one out and thinking of a bunch of films and TV shows to fill it. I'd be interested to hear about your quadrants in the comments below. But John, you might say, doesn't introducing objective assessment put us into creatively destructive mindsets where we just become obsessed with rules and what should and shouldn't be done in storytelling? Also, what exactly even is good and bad writing? I'm hoping to answer both of these questions in the next section. The way that I've found to healthily introduce objectivity into writing and media critique is the idea of problem solving and promise delivery. What do I mean by these two things? Well, promise delivery is simple enough. The opening scene of a film or TV show should let the audience know what kind of story this is going to be and what the conflict or mysteries are. Think about the opening of Lord of the Rings, for example. In under 10 minutes, we are given everything we need to know about the One Ring's history, why it's dangerous, and who's going to be responsible for trying to destroy it. Peter Jackson and the writers have made a promise to the viewer that we are going to watch a medieval fantasy story about unlikely heroes trying to stop a Dark Lord from getting his favourite piece of jewellery back. If the trilogy stopped at Saruman's death at the start of Return of the King, then this would be horribly unsatisfying because the films have failed at delivering the promise that's been made. Similarly, this can be applied to genre and tone. One of my biggest gripes against Avengers Endgame is that we have a fantastic opening scene where Hawkeye is teaching his kids archery and then witnesses his entire family turning to dust as Thanos executes his plan. The tone that's been established is that this is going to be a darker story that's heavily focused on character and the idea of loss. Instead, what we got was a light-hearted time heist filled with cringe humour such as the Hulk dabbing and Thor playing Fortnite. The Russo brothers thus failed in their promise to deliver a serious superhero drama, and instead gave us a run-of-the-mill wacky comic book adventure. So next time you watch a film or start a new TV show, think about what the opening scene or episode is promising, and see if the writers and directors deliver on those promises by the end of the story. Bad films and TV shows often do not deliver on these promises in a satisfying way. But on to the real spice that I want to share, the idea of problem solving. A writer or creator wants to tell a story, but in order to put that story from thought to creation, they have some problems to solve. How do I film the story in a way that makes it clear to the audience about what's happening? How does my hero overcome the villain? How do I make my main character compelling so that the audience roots for their success? How do I make the end of the story more uplifting? The list goes on, and these problems can range from anything to do with the writing to how the film or TV show is shot. What Objectivity can do then is put you in the right mindset to be aware of these problems and work to solve them. Now, how you solve these problems is where the creativity comes in. Every story has its own context, its own universe, and its own set of characters, which is why trying to assign rules to writing is so difficult. You might hear, for example, that you should never make your superhero too overpowered, otherwise they'll never have interesting challenges to overcome. But then you look at characters such as Superman or One Punch Man, and you find out that that is not always the case. Instead of rules then, we should have problems, and what we can do with those problems is come up with different solutions that fit the story that we're writing. The problems are objective and roughly fall into two categories. How do I keep my audience engaged with the story? And how do I convey the information and themes of the story in an effective way? Good writing and content creation solves these two problems in interesting and efficient ways. 12 Angry Men, for example, is 90 minutes of 12 men sitting in a room discussing moral philosophy, and the writer and director has solved this problem of engagement by making every character unique and written with clearly defined agendas. Of course, there is much more to that, and with any narrative problem there are 1,000 things you have to do to solve it, but this video is not a deep dive into 12 Angry Men, though I should totally do that sometime. In terms of more specific objective standards that can help solve these problems, then I could go on and on about internal consistency, realistic character writing, and great acting, but I'd rather point you to the rest of my channel where I go into these topics in much more detail. For the time being, I just want to hammer home that there are no fixed rules when it comes to writing, only fixed problems for the creator to solve in whatever way makes sense for the story that they are telling. And no one is denying that sometimes finding a solution to these problems is tough and complex, but hey, that's part of the fun, and when you pull it off, my god is it satisfying. I want to close out this video by addressing a common question that I come across both online and in my personal life. Why do you care so much? Why do you care if they completely butcher a character's arc? Why do you care if a fantasy TV show leaves a water bottle blatantly in shot? Why do you care if you have to listen to clunky dialogue? It's just a film or TV show, right? Well, there are several answers to that question, and I hope the following rant will give you something to chew on. Human beings have been telling stories to each other since the dawn of, well, humankind. From rudimentary cave paintings to mythic poems to books to film, one of the things that binds us all together regardless of race, culture and technology is our desire to tell stories. I would argue that it is a core trait of being human, and in some form or another everyone wants to tell and listen to stories, and I think it will be that way until the end of time. Stories are not only things to entertain us and help pass the time. They are vehicles of teaching and instruction, a way for us to pass wisdom down to future generations and educate them on our history, both good and bad. Great stories have moral lessons to teach us and help us improve ourselves as a person. They can give us insights into kinds of people who we might not have had much exposure to otherwise, thus increasing our empathy and our ability to communicate with those different from ourselves. Stories can help us understand our emotions and feelings in a way that we may not have otherwise been able to. They can help us to realize what makes us joyful, what makes us somber, and what makes us terrified. Sometimes they can even help us process our past and current traumas. Truly great stories inspire us to pursue careers, break boundaries, invent new technologies. Characters who we become attached to can act as role models for us to emulate, and this can be incredibly important for those who don't have the privilege of having a positive role model in real life. So yeah, given all of that, I think stories are pretty important, and I would much rather experience good ones than bad ones. When great stories are produced and given to people, I would hope that they are written with care and that the creators don't treat us all like idiots with tiny attention spans. It can thus be very frustrating to see a film or TV show try to impart a message and fail miserably to the point that it accidentally teaches the opposite. I would point at the disastrous Karen movie that, while being subjectively very entertaining, ends up creating negative stereotypes about black people and women. It can be very frustrating when a film or TV show aims to provide an immersive escape from the real world and then ends up shoving politics down the viewer's throat unnecessarily. And no, that is not me critiquing any particular branch of politics, it is just a statement about there being a right time and a right place to explore those topics. It can be very frustrating when we follow a character's journey to becoming a better person and they randomly 180 and fail in that arc for no other reason than shock value. Time is precious, and we should spend it consuming well-written media that is engaging and communicates its ideas effectively. There is nothing wrong with having standards and being critical of film and TV as long as those criticisms are based in objectivity and logic rather than in pure emotion. I know that for many people, TV and film is just a time to switch off your brain and just be entertained by action scenes, or sometimes you just want a simple story that doesn't require much deep thought to enjoy. But hey, you know that you can have both, right? There are plenty of great action films or stories with simple plots that are expertly written to be enjoyed by both the casual and hardcore filmgoer. Off the top of my head, I'd recommend Die Hard, or the original Indiana Jones trilogy, or Dredd, or Hot Fuzz. We can absolutely have our cake and eat it too, but again this requires writers and directors to actually put effort into, the writing. If we as fans and critics just nod along with the next mediocre or shitty film that gets thrown at us and don't voice valid criticisms against them, then surprise surprise, we'll just keep receiving mediocre and shitty films. We have covered a lot in this video, and if you made it this far then you have my gratitude and my respect. Let's refresh on some of the key points. Having a purely subjective approach to media criticism comes with a lot of problems. Introducing an objective look into media may be difficult, but is crucial to strive for if we want to have meaningful conversations. Films and TV shows we experience can be split into 4 categories that take both subjectivity and objectivity into account. Writing is not about following rules, but about delivering a story's promise and solving its narrative problems. And finally, it is absolutely understandable and okay to care about good storytelling. There is much more to unpack, more to explore, and more to analyse here. This video was originally an introductory springboard to my channel and the methodology of problematization in storytelling. If you want more, then go check out the rest of my channel. I apply this method to many aspects of film and TV, and I'm not done by a long shot. In terms of the rest of my original problematization and storytelling videos, I think I'm going to unlist them for the time being. While I was proud of them at the time, the quality of the videos are not as polished as the rest of my videos now are, and frankly, there are many of them that I want to remake anyway. Thank you all so much for your continued support of this channel, it really means a lot. Gonna try to keep going with roughly 1 video a month, but who knows, there might be smaller nuggets of content that get thrown in there as well, so keep an eye out. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and remember to keep writing.